Welcome back to Blurred Summits. Today we have with us Immad Nayeem to talk about balancing your identity. So Immad, how do you define an identity? What does an identity mean?
Identity is how you choose to view yourself because that's who you'll act like and that's how people will perceive you as. So it's how you view yourself.
So how do you work to find your identity?
Work to find it. Part of it's being honest with who you want to be. And also it's about learning where you've come from. So a lot of people, they only focus on who they want to be, or like they want to be like their friends, or they want to be like a certain person in society or whatever, but they never look at their roots. Or sometimes, like, especially people that come from like immigrant backgrounds, they'll like ignore their culture or they'll ignore like their family or whatever. And that's a big part of your identity that you can't just throw away, right? So I'd say, it's your experiences, right? And how you're raised, right? Like the whole nature nurture, that all feeds into your identity and who you become.
So, when I kind of think about identity, I think about an individual identity and collective identity. Do you think that those exist? Do you think that there is a differentiation between the two, or do you think that they're kind of one and the same and we're just thinking of them in different ways?
I think they're just like, it's not like there's two different parts of you. It's just like your identity is your identity, and it's like what group you belong, like what group you choose to belong with.
Yeah,
that's your collective identity. Like who you associate yourself with, who you spend your time with. That's part of your collective identity. Because like those values that you like, the people you hang out with, right? Those values are gonna be reflected back onto you, right? And so I think with individual versus collective identity, their identity, you can kind of break it down into those two, but they're not separated from each other.
Okay. So you kind of said people, like, you almost choose your identity based off the people that you hang around with, the groups that you surround yourself with, so on and so forth, your experiences. So you kind of think that identity is something that we pursue ourselves, or something that we're kind of given?
So obviously you're given your circumstance, right? Like you're given the family that you have, you're given your social status, right? Like in terms of if your family's well off, if your family's struggling, right? Like these things are given, right? But where you go from there, that's up to you, right? And that's why I was talking about experiences. Those experiences that you have, right? Like for example, I could go to a trip to a country that I've never been to, like let's say like Norway, and I might learn something there that might change the way I view something, right? Like maybe I grew up, I don't know, hating oysters or whatever, right? But I go there, right? And so that experience, I'm not going to be someone who is going to say I hate oysters anymore. It's because you just never had them right, or right? So that's why I think you're given certain things to work with. That's your identity. And then to build on that, your experiences are what furthers your identity, and you kind of like sharpen out the statue, whatever, of who you are.
So oftentimes kind of like identities are fragmented, right, into like different scenes. Do you feel the same way about yourself?
I feel like, yeah, especially, us growing up, we live in again, I keep bringing it up, like immigrant families, right? Because like I come from one, right? Like when you're in school, there's a whole different culture, a whole different way. And when you're home, there's a whole different language that you speak, right? And so there's all these fragments of who you are, and it's kind of your job to figure out how to bring them together. Because again, like you don't want to neglect your family, right? Because that just leads to things down the line that you don't want to and that's unhealthy, right? Or you don't want to neglect friends, right? Because that's also not healthy, right? So you need to figure out a way how they work together, right? And sometimes there's certain groups who are too toxic to this point where they'll tell you to ignore your family, and that's why at that point maybe sometimes your family's not the greatest influence, right? But again, you need to work with the pieces you have to kind of bring them together, to be more confident in who you are.
Is there something that you did that like specifically helped you bring your different identities together?
Just not neglecting. Like, I feel like a lot of kids, because again, I'm Muslim, and I feel like a lot of kids, they neglect who they are, or like the religion of, like, that their family that there has. And I think you need to, or even the culture, right? A lot of kids, they're like, oh, I don't want to speak the language, or like the food or whatever, right? There's a lot of parts that, our culture brings with us when when our parents come over to Canada or North America or whatever they immigrate to, right? You need to make sure that you don't neglect those things, because then you're not being honest with yourself, right? Like, because that's a part of you, and you can, eventually cut that off completely and you become someone totally different. But I think that's a part of you can't just ignore, right? And you need to come to terms with that before you move on, because then it'll just be like an empty part of you that was never fulfilled.
Yeah. So do you think, like, when you're coming to terms with these elements of your identity, you kind of mentioned, get to terms with your identity or your culture or where you came from, and then you can choose to throw that away and do something else, or to continue down that path, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so there's a point when you're at a crossroads, right? And you have to kind of decide, is this something that I am going to embrace, or is this possibly not in my journey, right? What do you think? How does a person decide which of the paths to take, right? How do we decide?
You need to understand it first, like you said, right? Like, you can't just ignore something, because then, later on there might be regret or whatever with, certain relationships that were cut off or whatever. But I think you need to understand it and see what do those certain things give you, right? Like, for example, do the people that you hang out with, do they help you become a better person, right? Or are you proud of who you, like, you need to see, are you proud of who you are, and is it worth being proud of, right? And for some people the answer is no, right? And for some people, certain relationships are toxic and they need to get out of those relationships, or certain cultural practices, like, for example, like a certain cultural practice might be like your parents really want you to get like an arranged marriage or whatever, right? And that might not be right for you. And so that's a battle that you take. Or something more practical is like a career path, right? It might be a cultural thing, like your parents believe that you're going to become an engineer, doctor, lawyer, right? And personally, for me, that wasn't for me, right? And I understood where my dad was coming from. I totally understand it. He's been an engineer his whole life, and he thinks financially that's the best thing to do. And I had to understand his perspective before I cut it out. Yeah. Right? So you need to understand these things and see what's for you, what works for you, what helps you become a better person, what makes you more fulfilled, and then you can move on.
Was there one of those things where you were faced with a crossroads and you decided that I'm going to go the other way?
Yeah, like I feel like the biggest one is like my career path, right? Like there's not a single person I know from like our family, like our family friend circle. Like I know friends now who are also in the same program, but like, especially to my dad, he doesn't know a single person who like his friend's kid is also becoming a paramedic, right? Yeah. And to him, it's like, this isn't a job. Like to him, this isn't a job for brown people, right? And I feel like that's also part of the problem, and that's also part of why I chose to become a paramedic, right? There's like tons of doctors, but there's no one in like emergency first responder care, right? Yeah. And there's people who I can understand better than other people, right? And that's also why I wanted to go into the field, right? So the biggest crossover that I've had to choose between was, my career path, and not pleasing my parents in the short term to please them in the long term, kind of.
So when dealing with these crossroads, what are some tips or pieces of advice you could give people that are dealing with them right now to make it easier for them to get through it or make that decision?
I think if you're dealing with relationships, like if you're dealing with what somebody wants something for you and you want something else, because that's like the one I can talk to, right? You need to understand their perspective. Like, for example, for my dad, I couldn't have ignored what my dad was saying, because then that's unfair to my dad. Like obviously our parents are giving us advice that they wanted when they were our age, right? And they still think it's what's best for us. Like obviously our parents aren't gonna tell us to do something that's bad for us, right? Even though it might be bad for me, I personally didn't want to do what my dad wanted me to do, and I'm a lot more happier doing what I want to do. But at the same time, I didn't cut off that relationship. So you need to understand their perspective, and you need to come to terms with them, right? And obviously, if it's something that it's hard, okay, like it's not going to be easy. Like that conversation I had with my dad was probably like the hardest thing I've had to do in my life, right? But you'll both be stronger. Like that relationship will be stronger coming out of it than it was before. It'll take time, but you need to understand their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think, personally speaking, I think that a lot of people have been big factors in building up my own identity, right? Like kind of where I fit in the world. Do you think that there are a number of people that you can list off, you don't have to list them off, but like that you can list off very distinctly, these people defined who I am today as a person?
Oh, 100%, bro. Like, especially like, I feel like every period of your life, there was someone other, like obviously your parents are always there, right? But your parents can't always be the most relatable, right? And so I feel like there's always going to be mentors or teachers or people who, like for example, one of the reasons why I wanted psychology was one of like my mentors, he was a psychologist, and I thought that's what I wanted, right? And it wasn't what I wanted, but I went into it because I was like, hey, look, he's happy, he's he's got a good family, he loves what he's doing, and I thought that's what was for me. Right. And, I had a mentor me as well. But, at the end, like, I had to be honest, like, this isn't for me. Right. So, yeah, like, there's tons of other people. Like, I don't want to mention them, but, there's people you look up to for certain things. Right. And they're obviously, they're definitely going to influence you.
So, you kind of mentioned that one of your mentors, it was because of them that you were inspired to go into psychology initially. Right. So do you think that there is kind of possibly that dark side or that bad side of mentors and teachers that make us follow in possibly someone else's journey and neglect our own journey?
100%. Like, he never forced me to go into it, right?
Of course, yeah.
But it's something that I convinced myself it worked for him, right? It's something unique. It might be something I'm interested in. Why don't I give it a try? And, I gave it a try. It wasn't for me, right? And so, but I think, obviously, if there's someone you look up to so much that you don't see fault in what they do, right? And, like, that's how, like, cults start, right?
Yeah.
Like, sorry to make it dark, but, like, the whole idea behind cults is, like, people respect this person so much where they won't say no to whatever they want, right? And so, obviously, you need to have a healthy balance between like respecting someone and also knowing what you want, right? Like you can't ever let someone take control of your thoughts or what you do, right?
Yeah. So what specifically do you look for in like a mentor when you're trying to look for some guidance?
First of all, the biggest thing is before I look at like what helps me is like I want to make sure like I'm respecting their time. Like for example, I have a certain project. I had a meeting with someone who had done a similar thing. And that meeting, I was like super nervous about that meeting because I was like, look, this guy's like so busy. I can't believe he's making time out of his day to meet me, right? So I wanted to make sure like I was prepared and everything like for that meeting. The meeting was supposed to be 30 minutes, but he liked the project that I was doing so much that I ended up being like 45 minutes, right? So again, he's a busy person, but I was able to respect his time. But one of the things I look forward to, look for is, have they gone through a similar experience that I want to go through? Right? Like, for example, whether it be starting a business, whether it be doing a certain project, like a charity project or whatever. If I'm spending time with a mentor or somebody I'm looking for, they have to go through something similar, right? And usually it has to be someone that's closer to age, right? Like someone who's a couple of years ahead of you, but enough that the times were the same or like similar. So that their challenges weren't as different.
Yeah, where they're comparable, right?
Exactly.
So, whether you like it or not, you're kind of a teacher or a mentor or somebody who's looked up to by a lot of the people that you teach, right? And so with the experiences that you've had in the past where your mentor's path wasn't your path, or someone has helped you in your worldview, how do you kind of take those lessons, and now you're the mentor, now you're in the driver's seat, how do you apply those lessons into how you kind of teach and conduct your life?
Yeah, so I remember a friend once came up to me, and I think he's in grade 12 now, but he told me he's interested in being a paramedic, right? And, you know, me, prior to going to psychology, like prior to me making the whole life change, I would have been like, oh my God, like I would have been so hyped for him, right? But, you know, I just told him, look, man, this job isn't meant for everyone, right? And it's something you really want to do, right? And he thought about it for a few weeks and he realized that, you know, that's probably not something that he wants to do. And he moved on, right? So I think being as transparent as possible, right? Like I might make it sound like this amazing thing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're still dealing with horrible things that happen to like good people.
Yeah.
Right. And so at the end of the day, the journey, someone else, you need to understand everyone's on their own path and what works for you isn't going to work for them, but you try to help them as much as you can.
And that's really interesting because it requires a certain level of self-awareness, because we always want people to kind of do the things that we're doing. We like to think, you know, the path that I'm pursuing, this is like an amazing path. Everyone should do what I'm doing. You know, I mean, you see it in the entrepreneurial scene a lot, right? Yeah. Be an entrepreneur. Everyone should be an entrepreneur.
Do this drop shipping,
right?
And all this other stuff.
But it's really interesting to have the self-awareness that you have, where you say, you know, take a second to think about it. Don't, like, he probably came to you looking for somebody to be his supporter and to like encourage him 100%. Like, you should definitely go into this. This is something you should definitely do. But you kind of told him, hey, you know, take a step back, evaluate what are your values, what are the things that you actually want to do. You know, I think that's like definitely a really great sign for a teacher.
Well, yeah, like a lot of people, like when they come looking for a mentor, right, they're really in like a vulnerable position.
Yeah.
So like making sure that they have the opportunity to think out their situation fully is so vital to that, right?
Because especially if you trust the person, you know, this person, he trusts you. So when he's coming to you, if you came and you told him, yeah, 100%, you should just go into this head on, then you know, you might have not have helped him as much as possible because he would have not asked himself those important questions.
Yeah, like mentioning to him all the hardships through it probably helped them more than had you said, hey, I got you, I'll help you through all this stuff, right? Made him actually test himself rather than you giving him the answer he was hoping to listen to.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people out there, probably in high school, probably in university, maybe they're younger, and they feel very lost, right? Maybe they don't fit into any particular cliques in school. They don't have a solid foundation or a solid friend group that can get behind them in every project. And they're kind of looking and they're asking themselves, okay, who am I? Like, what is my path going to be? And it seems like right now, my path is just to drift along with the group because I don't know anything better than that, right? What do you say to that person?
Again, like the biggest thing is being honest with yourself, right? So society might tell you got to be this, do that. And it might give you a certain order of you go to university, get married, buy a house, all this stuff, right? But you need to understand that there's literally billions of people and they've all gone through different experiences, right? And they've all made different paths, right? And you need to understand, you need to ask yourself, what do you want for yourself? And how do you want to feel? Like we talked about in the last episode, right? The biggest thing is, how do you want to feel in 5 years, right? Or how do you think what will make you feel that way? Right? So how do you want to feel and what will make you feel that way? I think those are the two things. You need to be very honest with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because, like, an interesting thought is, you know, sometimes I'll be driving by, like, the hillside and I'll look out and it'll be, like, a community, right?
Yeah.
And you'll just, like, you know, you see a community from afar. You see, like, all the houses. Like, all side by side, like, the rows of houses all the way along. Yeah. And I always think to myself, I'm like, seems like seems like everyone makes it out all right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Seems like everyone makes it out all right. I'm like, you know, you stress about everything. It's like, but it seems like everyone makes it out all right.
Like these are like $500,000 houses, like.
And it's like, and it's not just like one of them.
Yeah.
It's not like two of them.
It's like everywhere.
Rows and rows, hundreds of houses, right?
Thousands
of houses in a single city, right? It seems like, maybe there are different paths, you know, because you can't have thousands of, you know, families all doing the same thing. You
can't have everyone be a doctor or a lawyer or engineer, right?
Exactly. And so, you know, in the end, it seems like we all just make it out all right, you know? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and going down your own path that you're really interested in too, right? Like whatever matches your identity is so important because you get so much more joy out of it than going down some path you thought because your mentor was like, hey, I'm doing this, so you should do the same thing, right? Like, not everyone's meant for the same thing. So yeah,
I think that's a really good point that Immad brought up. A key defining thing, if you want to see, is the person that I'm considering a teacher and a mentor, are they actually good for me? It's like, ask yourself, are they supporting the things that I'm doing that might be different to the things that they're doing? Or are they only pushing me to what they know?
Like pushing all the positives on you, right?
Right? Are they telling me 100% you want to do the things that I'm doing? Because if they are, then maybe they don't have your best interest in mind, right?
Maybe they're looking for someone they can mentor, quote unquote, because they're not really mentoring you. They're just dragging you down your life path, right? But
yeah.
But yeah, I guess it shows that you have to be careful with who you're talking to in those vulnerable positions, because sometimes they're trying to use you to their advantage, as opposed to you getting them to help you out, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today, Immad. Definitely gained some valuable insights from you.
Well, yeah, we'll have Immad on quite often, once a week here. It'll be a regular occurrence here, hopefully. So
yeah, so get used to him because he's lovely. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's episode on Blurred Summits. If you'd like to catch the full video podcast, you can catch us on YouTube. The full audio podcast is out on all platforms, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for daily content where we'd love to get to know you guys more. Thank you.